Yo, what is up, everybody? Heart of the Card Snap here, and today I will be teaching you how to win games before turn 3. What I mean by this is I will be teaching you about the snowballing effect, which is basically turning early game pressure into late game pressure and ultimately winning the game from your early game to your late game. Why you want to do this is because the game is increasingly moving towards this direction. We have seen with cards like Zabu that Zabu turns the early game into the late game very well, and he's a very strong card. We see with new releases like Surge that this is becoming increasingly important, turning your early game pressure into your late game pressure, and cards like Mr. Fantastic in the future will probably just push this even further, especially when you can put 3 of those type of cards in your deck. Also, these type of cards just give you snap equity. If you know what you're winning the game early, you can snap early, and now your opponent doesn't know you're in a game state of advantage, and he's more likely to stay, gives you more cubes. So how we will be doing this is we will be classifying these type of cards into 3 different categories, naming cards that fit into these categories, and teaching you basically what type of cards are good to put in your deck for early cube equity. Getting straight into this, the first category we will be talking about is arguably the poster child of the snowballing effect. It is cheap ramp cards, which are becoming increasingly common as of recently. What cheap ramp cards are basically saying is that before turn 2, because turn 1 and turn 2 are often kind of useless in terms of power output, instead we will be becoming more resource efficient in the future by playing cards that allow us to do so. Cards that fit into this category is Surge, which makes cards cheaper as turns go on, Zabu, which makes your draw of 4s cheaper, and Mr. Fantastic First Step, which will make cards in your hand cheaper for future turns. What these basically do is say that your resource efficiency on future turns is going to be more efficient while giving up a bit of tempo in the early turn. You can play a Bob or you can play a Zabu. Zabu's going to probably have a far bigger impact because he's only 2 points less, but he's increasing your resource efficiency in future turns by way more than Bob is creating tempo. Why these are strong is because they create better energy efficiency on more impactful turns. The later turns are obviously more impactful than the earlier turns because you have more energy and you have more things to do and you have more things to interact with. How it does this is basically saying in a very simple manner, a card that costs 4 is probably just more impactful. When it costs 3, because it's more energy efficient, it's the same effect, just at a cheaper cost. How specifically it's doing this is in 3 different ways. The first way is ramp scalers. The easiest way to think about this is Galacta on turn 3 naturally scales because you get 1 extra pot for Galacta, making it just a bigger card in general. So it just ramp scalers like that to put out more power because they come out earlier and they scale harder. The second way it does this is just by creating more volume. Let's say you want to play a Shang-Chi and a 3-drop. Normally you can't do that, but Zabu will bring Shang down to 3 cost, creating more volume of high impactful cards you can play. Another example of this, you might be able to, if you stack enough of these, now you have 3 drops you can play on turn 6, which is naturally going to be more impactful than 2 3-drops, just because you have a higher volume of impactful effect coming onto the board. The last way this does it is by creating unique interaction and unique text scenarios. The easiest way I think about this is a life on turn 5 often is very, very strong compared to a life on turn 6 because it messes up some of the setup for both turn 5 and turn 6. And it has some unique interactions with certain cards a life otherwise would not have play into, but these ramp cards allow that to be possible. The second category of cards I will be talking about is a card category I've dubbed Super Scalers. The poster child of this Super Scaler thing is Human Torch. Why Human Torch is so strong is because he is just unbelievably good at scaling very, very exponentially large. Another good example of this that makes his own deck is Deadpool. Deadpool has made the Destroy deck because he is a super scaler, just multiplying very, very quickly when you draw him early. Other good examples of this are Baltrock and Scream, which have otherwise made a somewhat poor archetype very strong because they scale very, very hard from the early game to the late game by pure raw numbers. So basically what a super scaler is a card that is in some way able to outpace other scalers with raw numbers that outweigh what the average scaler at that cost will do. Whether that be exponential growth with doubling or just very, very solid numbers with Scream and Baltrock, they all fit into this category. Why these are strong is because overwhelming power output will win games. In a game where you just have to win 2 locations with the most power, cards that naturally generate a lot of power will be very strong. So how specifically do they do this? Well, having one card that just wins one lane is very strong. A good case of this is like a 120 Human Torch. Yes, you put a lot of work into making him a 120, but he will just win a lane by himself, making him a very strong card. How this even makes it even stronger is when you start to add force multipliers to this. Something like a Frigga and a Human Torch gives you two cards that basically win a lane by themselves. Force multiplication will just win you games because you have now two super scalers in that scenario. Or force multiplication could work in another way, where Deadpool buffs up your Null, so now you're playing Deadpool and Null on your last turn. They're both huge lane-winning cards. That, yet again, is a way that you can create these super scalers from the early game and translate them into a late game win very easily. And then there's hidden parts to super scalers that are often very strong. One thing that I immediately think about is synergy between Baltrock and Cannonball, where Cannonball pushes out a card to win its own lane. Baltrock then follows the card, basically saying, I'm going to win both lanes, because Baltrock's there follow one card to the other lane that I need power in. Baltrock's there naturally go there, and then Cannonball's there win the other lane. So that's how these super scalers are able to win lanes by themselves, and from the early game to the late game. The third category is a category that's a bit more niche and you have to put a lot more thought into, but it is these brute force methods of just winning games early on. And these are arguably the methods that I enjoy the most. What these methods do is say, I'm going to win the game by early disruption. I want to mess up your game plan. I want to put aggressive lane pressure. I want to win lanes early. And that is how I'm going to win the game early. Why these work is because it disrupts the flow of your opponent's game plan. You're kicking down their sandcastle, punching them in the face. You are just putting an insane amount of pressure on your opponent to answer. And these are the type of decks I love. Cards that fit into this category is Negasonic. You might know my priority surfer list. This is what it was built on, just brute forcing an early win because I placed down Negasonic, blow up your Dakin. Your entire discard game plan is ruined because I just brute forced an early game win. Other examples of this are Lockdown, locking down a lane with like Storm on turn 3 into turn 4, with Cerebral is pretty strong. Those old Professor X decks that lock down a lane on turn 4, you're just brute forcing a single lane win, which obviously will translate into a secondary win if your deck is built on winning one lane through this brute force method and having a secondary way to win the second lane. A third example of this, which is a very prevalent thing to this day, is Clog, where they put this insane amount of early game pressure to just basically aggro win a lane by clogging you, allowing you to play 0 cards into that lane. And then just having lane winners for the other lane, whether that be Cannonball blowing something up or just dropping down a big gore and forcing you to answer. Clog is another way to just brute force a lane win, which all three of these are very much methods I enjoy. And this is another way to have early snap equity and just brute force wins and just create a snowballing effect. In this case, you're snowballing because you win one lane and you can just drag that into the end game to win a second lane. How these work are disruption of synergy in the case of Negasonic, or generally limiting board space, which both Lockdown and Clog do. And with that, I want to thank you guys all for watching, and if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you think you learned something, check me out at twitch.tv at Heart of the Card Snap, and I will show you how I use these principles in real games to create real value and real wins and dominate the top ladder. Thank you guys all for watching, and I hope to see you guys in the next video.